Good evening, everyone. I know that some of you are still getting some refreshments and something to drink, but we're going to start right on time because we have a lot of information tonight, and we want to make sure that we can get through everything, and we can have time for questions, and we can have time to do our work session as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kristen Teig-Torres, and I will serve as your MC for the evening. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2009. I've been involved in the Beyond Pink team's advocacy arm since 2012, after attending my first National Breast Cancer Coalition Advocate Leadership Summit. Since that time, I've attended 3 additional summits, lobbied my legislators at the local, state, and national level, graduated from NBCC's Project LEAD, an intensive week-long scientific training on breast cancer, and have been invited back to participate in Advanced Project LEAD last summer and will be going again this coming July. Thank you all for attending tonight. We're so pleased to have you all with us. I would like to take a moment and acknowledge our sponsors for the event, Genomic Health and Hy-Vee College Square. Thank you. Ignite the Cancer Conversation was created by members of the Beyond Pink Team advocacy arm to bring cancer education to the Cedar Valley. Our vision is to bring diverse communities together and activate the conversation that will initiate and develop concrete steps to conquer cancer. Our first event focused on the science of breast cancer through developments and advancements in immunology and vaccines, with guest speakers Dr. Keith Knutson from the Mayo Clinic and Dr. George Weiner from the Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center in Iowa City. Our mission is to ignite the cancer conversation by going beyond discussion limited to awareness, early detection, and treatment. Tonight, we will develop concrete steps that address prevention and eradication of all cancers, looking at environmental factors that impact our health. So tonight's agenda. The agenda is laid out in your program in front of you. Our speakers will address the issues of radon, Iowa pesticides, and water. We will then bring the information together and open the room to questions. After our question and answer period, you will create action steps and work with your table colleagues, creating your own individual plan of action. Following the work session, we will offer ways to stay connected. You will notice that each speaker has a separate page in your program for note-taking. Please take time to write down thoughts you may have during the presentations, as we would like to have a robust discussion during the question and answer portion. Please feel free to help yourself to more refreshments, and we would like to let you know that the restrooms are located out this door and down the hall, and then take a left turn and you'll find the men's and women's rooms. We also would like you, if you happen to have a Twitter account, to tweet during this event. Our hashtag is Ignite the Cancer Conversation. And while we do want you to tweet or possibly post on Facebook, whatever your social media preference might be, please make sure that your phones are silent during the presentations. Before we get started with our speakers tonight, I'd like to quickly let you know the process we will follow to ask questions. As you are listening to a speaker, please write down each question you have for tonight's speakers on an index card that would be on your table. Please use 1 card per question and identify on the card the speaker to whom you are asking the question. Please hold your card up immediately after you have a question written down, and we will have helpers come around and collect those questions. We will address as many questions as possible during our Q&A session. I would also like to introduce you to our environmental health indicators model, and we have this provided by the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department. There are systematic connections between our ecosystem and our health. Part of the understanding of this system is to become aware and informed about how certain things in the environment we cannot see are impacting our health. This awareness helps inform our actions to make a real difference. Each of our speakers will refer back to this model to frame our understanding of how and where we can act. Now, on to our speakers. Our first speaker, Gail Orcutt, grew up in Carroll, Iowa. She earned a BA from the University of Northern Iowa, an MA from Viterbo University, and taught in Iowa public schools for 33 years. 2 years into retirement, Gail was diagnosed with lung cancer. This was a shock, since she had never smoked. While recovering from removal of her entire left lung, Gail happened upon an article titled "Lung Cancer and Non-Smokers." That was the first time she had ever encountered the word radon. Her home was tested, and that was when she learned that she and her husband had been living in an unacceptable level of radon. All of her physicians agreed that this was the cause of the cancer. Since knowledge is power, Gail has become a determined advocate for radon awareness. Our first speaker.
Okay, in the 10 minutes I have, I have at least 3 goals for you to consider. Learn what radon is and how it can affect you and your family. Understand that radon testing is another cancer prevention, just like a colonoscopy, using sunscreen, or watching your weight. And thirdly, learn what you can do to promote radon awareness in your community. Oh, okay, there I am. So why should you care about radon? I wish someone had asked me if I tested for radon 20 years ago. I wouldn't be here today. So she briefly told you 7 years ago, I was diagnosed with lung cancer. Actually, 7 years and 2 weeks. So, and it was a shock. Since then, 3 years ago, oh, sorry, okay. The cancer metastasized to my left hip. So I was treated with radiation, and I was good for 3 more years. And then this last summer, it returned to my left hip, and there was so much damage that I had my left hip replaced. But I'm here, and I'm strong. I'm on an oral chemo, which is very expensive, but thank goodness for research. I'm here, and I plan to be here for a long time. If there are any lung cancer survivors in the audience, I would love to meet you later. So why should you care? You should care because radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer and the leading cause among non-smokers. You should care because 400 Iowans die every year because of radon.
Is this going to work?
Can you hear me? Okay. No, you can't hear me? Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you just move it up?
Oh, sure. Okay, and you should care because living with a radon level of 4 picocuries per liter, and 4 doesn't sound like a big number, but you run the same risk for lung cancer as if you would smoke 8 cigarettes a day, just with that. Or 200 chest x-rays a year, same amount of risk. It's huge. So what is radon? It is an odorless, colorless, tasteless, radioactive gas. The glaciers brought uranium with them millions of years ago. So radon is a soil gas that gets trapped in our homes, and when we inhale, it can damage the DNA in our lungs. 7 out of 10 homes in Iowa have an unacceptable level of radon. We have the highest incidence in the country. We're always going to be number 1 in something. Isn't that reassuring? Yeah. So radon-induced lung cancer is responsible for approximately 21,000 deaths in this country every year. If we looked at all cancer deaths, those attributed to radon would rank 9th overall. This number includes the 400 Iowans each year. That's about the same number of Iowans that die on our highways every year. And we hear a lot about preventing more highway deaths. We don't hear a lot about preventing more of the radon-induced lung cancer deaths. So what can you do? I'm sorry, I've got a mess here. You can learn about radon and share what you've learned with family, friends, physicians, school boards, legislators. Iowa has the highest incidence of radon in the country, and the level of radon in your home will not remain constant. So everyone should test every 2 years. Okay, here's going to be the tricky part. I brought a kit to show you how easy it is. Yeah, no, I got it. I just don't have 3 hands. So it comes with great directions if you have any questions. There's also, you can call the Iowa Radon Hotline for any questions you have. But you fill out your contact information, and then there's this little cardboard piece that turns like this, and you stick it in here, and it keeps it open. And then you hang it in your basement for 3 to 7 days. You mark when you start it, and then when you take it down, you mark when you stopped. You just zip off the plastic, seal it, cut off the hanger, and it's already addressed and postage paid. So what you pay for your radon test tonight is all you're going to pay. You're not going to have to pay extra to have it analyzed or anything like that. So it's really, really easy to do. Okay. I've run into a lot of people who've told me why they don't have to test for radon. There's a lot of misunderstandings about radon and radon testing. And unless you live in a high-rise apartment, you need to test your home for radon. The best time to test is in the winter, and the second best time is in the summer, because your house is all closed up. For a short-term test, your house needs to be closed up. So people think if they have a new home, they don't need to test, or if they have a really old home and it's drafty, they don't need to test. Every home needs to be tested. The foundation doesn't matter, whether you have a basement, crawl space, or a slab. You need to test your home. Some people think they don't need to test because they live in a walkout. And the minute I tell them I live in a walkout, that gets rid of that excuse, doesn't it? A lot of people know that some pumps and some pits let in radon. This is true, but even if you don't have one in your home, you still need to test. And a lot of people say that they tested when they bought their home, which is great, had it professionally tested, but radon levels are not constant. So you need to test your home every 2 years, or even sooner if you've done some major home improvement like new windows, new roof, anything like that. Redid things in your basement. This is one of my favorites. I have a radon detector, and I try to be really gentle with this, but you probably don't have a radon detector. You have a CO monitor, which is great. We all need CO monitors in our homes, but we also need to test for radon. And that you can do with the little test kit. It's easy to fix your home. Mine was fixed in less than a day. It's cheaper than fixing a leaky roof. If you're building a new home, it only costs from $300 to $500 to have the system put in. For an existing home, the average right now in the state is $1,400. It could be a little less, it could be a little more. In the booklet that you got, you can go to the IDPH website, and they have a list of all the mitigators and testers in the state. Everyone has to be licensed and certified, which is great. That's something a lot of states don't have, so we're happy to have that. Oh, and you will not have a pipe going through your living room. At least we don't. Okay, you've seen systems like this on the outside. You can't see mine. Mine's all goes from the inside. But some people say, well, I don't have to test. We already have a system. You still need to test. That's how you know your system is still working. Sooner or later, the fan might break in 15, 20 years, and you might need a new fan. So you need to keep testing. Oh, this is important. If you have to mitigate, and chances are you will with that 70%, you can pay for it with a Flex account or an HSA account. And that's kind of nice, using free money that way. Okay, the EPA says to mitigate your house if it comes in at a 4 or higher. The World Health Organization says mitigate your house if it comes in at 2.7 or higher. Gail Orchid says mitigate your house if it's more than a 2. You really don't want to live in a house that's more than a 2. The only reason I'm saying that is it's evidence-based. Dr. Bill Field from University of Iowa has told me that a third of the deaths from radon were people who were living with a level between a 2 and a 4. So I cringe when someone says, oh, we tested 3.8, we're good. No, you're not good. So the booklet. Okay, you got the booklet. You can get these for free, all that you want, from the Iowa Cancer Consortium. The 800 number is throughout the booklet, the Iowa Radon Hotline. So you can pass them out at churches, take them to your physician's office, take them to your hairdresser. Hairdressers are great for getting the word out. Take them to the library, anywhere you can think of. My dentist has some. Take them everywhere. So they're free, and they will send you as many as you want. Okay, that's the number for the Iowa Radon Hotline, and it's in your booklet. It's a great resource. They can answer any questions you have before or after you test. They can give you those free booklets. And, you can also order a long-term test if you want to do something a little longer. I guess that's it for them. Okay. Since the odds are that your home has an unacceptable radon level, don't be surprised that after you get the results, you need to mitigate. Fixing a home does not compare with trying to fix lung cancer. Trust me on that. 1 minute? Yikes. Okay, so don't use the word safe. You're only going to use the word acceptable. I'm not even looking at my notes here. Okay. If you've invited radon into your home, you can kick it out, all right? You can get rid of it. We don't want radon in our schools. Get after your school boards if they're not testing. It doesn't cost that much. It's not like fixing an asbestos problem like they used to do years ago. So, I'm supposed to use this, aren't I? After the presentation, you're going to be asked to set some goals. So here's my suggestion. Test your home and mitigate if necessary. Share what you've learned. Order booklets to share with others. Email your legislators. I'm getting the naughty look here. You can do something about this. You can be a mosquito. All right? You can make a difference. Thank you. Oh, you got that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Gail. I think we've got the sound issues now. We're just going to hold the microphone. I think that's the way to go here. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Kamiar Anshayan. He has lived in Cedar Falls since 1993 and works with his staff at UNI to engage community leaders, local governments, and businesses to create a sustainable and desirable future for our communities. He has worked in connecting Iowans to Iowa-grown foods by strengthening Iowa's local food economy. He and a team of community collaborators launched Green Iowa AmeriCorps after the flood of 2008 to serve low-income households in flood recovery with home energy improvements in mind. That program now serves 7 Iowa communities with 35 AmeriCorps members. Kamiar served on the Cedar Falls City Council from 2003 to 2011, where he was instrumental in implementing one of the most protective floodplain management ordinances. Kamiar earned his BS, MS, and PhD, all in mechanical and agricultural engineering at Ohio State University. He is the director of the Center for Energy and Environmental Education and teaches classes in environmental studies as well as food and agriculture in Iowa. Please welcome Dr. Einstein.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really nice to be here. And Gail reminded me it's the Ohio State University. Thanks so much, Gail. Mine has been at 4 for a long time, and I'm gonna tomorrow. Thank you. And actually, what I'm gonna talk about kind of really relates to also a very doable thing, even more doable than that. So let me start. Kind of first half, I want to kind of set the context for this, and then the second 5 minutes, I'll talk about the rest. So here's what a basic human genetics textbook says about cancer. Quote, as much as 90% of all forms of cancer are attributable to specific environmental factors. Because exposure to these environmental factors can, in principle, be controlled, most cancer could be prevented, unquote. The textbook continues, reducing or eliminating exposure to environmental carcinogens would dramatically reduce the prevalence of cancer in the United States, unquote. Now, you almost never hear or see the word carcinogen in doctors' offices nor in educational campaigns about cancer. 10 years ago, an American Cancer Society investigation identified 216 chemicals known to cause breast cancer in animals. Of these, 73 found in food, water, and consumer products, 35 are air pollutants, 29 of them are produced in the United States in large amounts every year. Given this reality, cancer prevention should really mean changing our nation's chemical regulatory system, which allows these known carcinogens to stay on the market and circulate in our economy when sound alternatives are available. So we should, those of us who are struggling with cancer and wondering, well, what's happening to the population, then we got to start questioning our energy policy, our agricultural policy, and these regulatory systems, right? So let's look at a little closer to Iowa. In 2014, 8 million pounds of acetochlor and 6.7 million pounds of atrazine, both corn weed killers, were applied to Iowa's soil and water. It's incredible. Atrazine is a possible carcinogen, a known endocrine disruptor, meaning it messes with your hormonal system. Banned in Europe, linked to reproductive cancers and birth defects, and is the most common weed killer detected in surface and groundwater in the United States. It's incredible. And we use millions of pounds of it in Iowa for corn. Are breast cancer prevention advocates paying attention here? Did your doctor tell you that 13 million pounds of Roundup, a probable carcinogen, are applied to bean grounds in Iowa annually? Did she tell you that about 50 million pounds of weed killers, insecticides, and fungicides are applied all over Iowa every year? Every year. And as an agricultural engineer, very familiar with how to grow crops, I can tell you, and all the farmers I know, none of that is necessary. Almost none of that. 95% of that is not necessary. So again, back to remember, reducing or eliminating exposure to environmental carcinogen would dramatically reduce prevalence of cancer in the United States. So doctors, public health officials, and cancer prevention advocates need to know one very important fact. It's totally possible to have a productive, practical agriculture in Iowa without pesticides, without high fertilizer content in drinking water of people in Des Moines. It's totally possible. Some farmers are already doing it. We need policies that make widespread adoption of these practices possible. And that would be cancer prevention. So here is the conclusion of a consensus statement of the cancer research and advocacy community to President's Cancer Panel in 2008, almost 10 years ago. Quote, "The most direct way to prevent cancer is to stop putting cancer-causing agents into our indoor and outdoor environments in the first place." Very logical, right? Very logical. So how do we act on that knowledge? Now I want to move to the next slide. Oh, yeah, here we go. How do we act on that knowledge? I have some ideas here, okay, in our own community, okay? All right, so how do we kind of go after this? And it's a cultural problem for the most part. So here's the problem. So I'm following that model. On the left is the place where I work, where fertilizer and herbicides are applied annually. On the right is an attorney's office where no herbicide, no fertilizer used for decades. And you see a huge difference, don't you? Okay, that's the problem, okay? But we're willing to do this, right? We're applying all this stuff for what, right? Okay, last summer, my students and I visited many, many, many neighborhoods, roughly 1,800 yards, and we assessed whether they sprayed or not. The red at least applied twice, orange probably once, and then green and yellow probably not. So you can see. And it's funny, if you talk with epidemiologists who've been studying health disparities, usually you find health disparities in poor neighborhoods. They have, well, in this case, the most well-to-do neighborhoods are the neighborhoods that are exposing themselves the most to herbicides, which is interesting. So, all right, let me run quickly here. So we estimated, take a look at this. This is pretty serious stuff. 2,800 pounds of 2,4-D, which was used in Vietnam, dicamba and MCPP. We are bringing it to our community, to our watershed, because of a cultural assumption that a weed-free lawn is good, you see? And unlike radon, which is there, this is our own doing, We're bringing it in, and we pay people, and we bring it in. So, all right. So here's, what do we know kind of about the data? I'm just going to skip and just go to this concluding statement by the American Academy of Pediatrics. It says, prenatal, household, and occupational exposures, maternal and paternal, appear to be the largest risks to kids. Children, this is a concluding statement, quote, children's exposure to pesticides should be limited as much as possible. I mean, this is very amazing. American Academy of Pediatrics is saying this, right? So here's the evidence, all right? There's a lot we could go over. I'm just going to, I'll skip all of that. So what will happen if we, what actions can we take? Well, quite a few people are doing it. This is Searly Park, hasn't been sprayed for 15 years. What happens if you don't spray? Well, this is Pfeiffer Park in Cedar Falls. You just get a diversity of plants come and go, and as long as you mow, it'll be fine. It'll be white clover, violet right now. It's beautiful. Diverse lawns are beautiful. It's okay. Relax. There's other issues in the world. A business on 18th Street, they just mow, no problem. Think of kids' health, think of your health. Diversity is good. I mean, you and I many organizations have made diversity it's a priority. Diversity is good. So diversity is good. Diversity is good. For a few weeks, it's going to look like this. It's beautiful. It's okay. You mow it, and then it'll all disappear. It's okay. It'll still look nice. Some parts of lawns could be turned into prairie, like some schools could do. In Canada, they've banned cosmetic use of herbicides almost 10 years ago, and everything is good. Nothing has fallen apart. The school in Toronto, my sister lives there, so one year I went there and worked on this. Towards the end. Okay, here's my end. Sorry. All right, here we go. End of the talk. What we're doing a campaign, a group of students and faculty at UNI, and we're trying to reach schools, parks, childcare centers, and institutions, and invite them to commit not to spray. We have a lot of work to do. This is a statewide campaign. We've already gotten Iowa City schools, Waverly schools to commit. We've gotten City of Dubuque, City of Cedar Falls. Quite a few cities have already committed. Iowa City committed 44 parks that they're not going to spray. So we need all of you to help us reach all of our schools. We haven't, both Cedar Falls and Waterloo schools spray every one of the schools. Why? We need to invite them to think about this. So that's the part of the campaign we're doing, and I encourage all of you to participate. I'll be around to talk with you. And I think that's the, we need partners and communities across Iowa. We have signs for everybody to be a good neighbor, because we spray, because people say, I'm spraying because I want to be a good neighbor. We're saying, no, don't spray and be a good neighbor. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All right, moving right along here. Thank you very much. Our final speaker this evening is Dr. Catherine Zeman. She is a professor of environmental health, allied health, in the Department of Allied Health and Human Services at the University of Northern Iowa. Dr. Zeman received her PhD in preventive medicine from the University of Iowa and has been a professor at UNI since 2000. Her research interests include various human health and environmental concerns in exposure assessment and immunotoxicology, with a focus on nitrate and human health issues. She teaches courses in environmental health science, human toxicology, and environmental and occupational health regulations. Also, environmental and occupational, I already said that, I'm sorry. I'm getting nervous because there's a word coming up that I don't know how to pronounce. Okay, so here we go. Her publications have focused on, here it comes, methahomoglobulinemia. Okay, she'll tell you when she gets up here. Immunotoxicological impacts of nitrates, environmental health disparities, and alternative health. And that's all I have written on this page. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Catherine Zeman.
I knew I couldn't do it, so I couldn't do it. It was a great job. It was a great job. Okay.
Yeah, when I got asked to come and speak tonight, they were saying to me, I really appreciate being here, by the way, and I think everybody is doing a really great job, so thank you. But they asked me to kind of make sure you tone it down, and so, you're probably going to use the biggest words tonight. So
Why'd you give them to me?
you wanted a bio, I didn't know. You know, I would have to say, maybe study the little squiggly things in your blood that protect you, you know, or something. Okay, so your white blood cells and the substances that they produce. So that's what immunotoxicology is about. So, yeah, okay. All right, well, you did a great job, so thank you. All right, so, okay, so tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about your water. How do you come to understand your water? How do you come to understand your water? Understand the characteristics of your water, where it's coming from, why it's so important to protect it, and hopefully make you think about some of this complete picture. We're hearing about indoor air quality. We're hearing about ambient air quality and indoor air quality from things you put on your lawn, and ultimately the quality of your water from things that end up in the watershed. And so I want to go ahead and stress that a little bit more as we go forward here. And thinking about water, water is an amazing thing. I can tell you a little bit about the cool thing about water. I kind of like to approach the topic. I like to think about it in the broad picture. And I started thinking, well, when NASA goes out into space to find life on other worlds, what's the first thing they look for? Water, right? You're not going to have any life as we know it without water. Why is that? Water is so cool. Water has an amazing bond angle. It has this bond angle of 104.5 degrees, and it has a positive and a negative end. So everything it comes into contact with, it can act like this neat multi-tool magnet, and it just pulls it along into the hydrologic cycle. And that's a little bit of part of the problem with the pollutants that we distribute everywhere or choose to put on our lawns, et cetera. Sooner or later, that stuff is in the food cycle as well as the watershed. And it's around the globe. And it's because of this cool aspect of water. It makes water a universal solvent, so it dissolves everything, right? And you might have heard that. And that bond angle makes water able to change, hold heat and release it, so that we actually have ice that floats, so that we don't freeze from the bottom up, so that life doesn't die over the winter in our ponds and streams. And in fact, if you take that bond angle, and if you've ever heard anything, I tried to find some kind of mystic quality about water. Maybe you've heard of Kabbalah, like numerology Kabbalah from ancient Judaism and practice. It reduces down to the number 1, which is interesting. Just do the numerology on the bond angle of water. It reduces down to the number 1, which according to them is the number, from a spiritual perspective, the number of creation, the primal force from which all other numbers spring forth. And it is said that when you truly understand the place and function of this most primal of all numbers, you will know all that there is to know, and enlightenment will be yours. That's kind of fascinating, right? So anyway, now that we're suitably impressed with water, you know that your body has a huge percentage of water, right? About 67% on average. If you're talking about your lungs, you're talking into the 80 percentiles. If you're talking about your brain matter, into the 70 percentiles. So the water that you take into your body is critical for your health and well-being. 1% dehydration, and you already can't think right, You already can't maybe even walk right, just at 1% dehydration. And people who've dealt with, cancer know about the problem with dehydration and issues like that. So you're probably a group that's already a little bit familiar with the importance of water. And one of the things I wanted to point out here is just all the sources of pollutants, both things that we call point sources, where you can go up to a pipe and you can measure it. You can measure a volume of pollutant and a certain amount of something like air or water, or things where you just have non-point sources that just run off from all these different activities. And a lot of them have to do with energy choices, with the choices related to the chemicals that we use in manufacturing or that we are applying to our lawns, and agricultural practices. So we have these manufacturing, these personal choices, agricultural practices, energy choices, and all of them are contributing different kinds of chemicals and substances that are pulled around in that system because of that magical property of water, that bipolar property of water, and that amazing bond angle that it has. And one of the interesting things that kind of comes up, this is data from the National Center for Health Statistics, and it was mapped by CNN just recently. And you can see here that these are cancer deaths around the United States for both males and females of all types of cancers, with the red areas being the most concentrated cancer deaths. Now, this is correlational data, so it has some issues. From an epidemiological perspective, there's debates back and forth, because it's just a correlation of total deaths by area around the United States. And you'll notice this is really the Mississippi River Valley area. Okay, and if we're taking a look at a watershed, it's interesting how a watershed sort of reflects the structure of a tree, doesn't it? So you're going to have water coming in from all these areas, pollutants can gather up here, and depending on where you're at in the watershed, you're going to get more or less pollutants, right? Because when you get to these concentrated parts of the trunk, you get a whole lot more pollutants, more pollutant load in your water. And when you get down to the roots, then, again, it starts filtering out in 5 minutes. Wow. And you don't have to, you're going to lose some of those pollutants. Just take a real quick look back there at the major part of that watershed as far as going down to the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, so quickly, it's important to know that very little of the water available to us is easily available or something we can drink. A very small percentage of it. Lots of it is tied up in ice and lots of it is salty. And when we get down to sharing that between agriculture and manufacturing, about 70% is going to agriculture, and about 20% to manufacturing. So yeah, that's a very small percentage of even less, much less than 1% that's potable water that we can drink to provide, you know, that healthy environment for ourselves, and our body being such a huge percentage of water. So what protects you? If you're on a private water source, these laws are working to protect you. Well, the Clean Water Act protects, you know, if you're on a public water source or a private source, these laws are working to protect you. Now, the Clean Water Act will protect everybody in the watershed, okay, by trying to prevent point and non-point source pollutants from going into that watershed. And that's why it's important to have regulations. If you do not have these regulations, and if you're not willing to pay something for them, you're not going to have that clean water. That's just pretty simple. And you're not really going to be able to get away from the effects of it. You know, there was a study in the St. Lawrence River Basin in the Arctic conducted by Canadian universities after they had collected up enough beached beluga whales that they could, you know, sample the fat of over 160 of these whales. And they found multiple persistent organic pollutants, DDT, Mirex, pesticides, benzoate-pyrene, which is a polyaromatic hydrocarbon. A lot of these things are associated with increased cancer risk and changes in DNA that we call adducts, things like that. Another interesting thing that they found, and this is in the Arctic Circle, so how, you know, you would think you're far away, but you're not getting away because of that hydrologic cycle. Another interesting thing they found is about 27% of those beluga whales that were sampled had cancerous tumors. And if you compared that percentage to the people living in that area, about 27% of the people in that area are suffering various types of cancers of all kinds. It's just interesting that you would find a similar percentage of the mammal living in the water and people living in the areas, you know, on land. So again, this is correlational, but there's been plenty of other studies where we have direct indications of carcinogenicity from various chemical substances. Benzene, benzoate-pyrene, which is polyaromatic hydrocarbon, and on and on. We could list a number of them. Many of those are organics that are controlled under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and they are controlled under something called maximum contaminant levels, and there's only about 87 of them that are monitored, but that's what's monitored in your public drinking water. And another thing called a maximum contaminant level goal, MCLG. Why did I put that up there? Because the goal is just purely human health. But the level where the monitoring occurs takes into consideration economics. Unless it's an acute condition that will kill you outright quickly, like methemoglobinemia, which will kill children if it's above 10 parts per million nitrate nitrogen. If it's that kind of situation, then there's a, you know, a clear level. And if not, then you're going to have to deal with these maximum contaminant level goals for a variety of different substances. An important thing about that, though, is here's the sliver of MCLs, 87, if you considered those per year related to the new chemicals that are introduced each year, about 700 that we don't monitor for. We don't monitor for drugs that people, you know, pass through their system that end up in the water. We don't monitor for plastics, microplastics, another big issue. Nanoscale plastics are showing up in our drinking water because of all of the plastics that have been dumped in rivers, streams, and oceans. And we're actually ingesting that in shellfish and in shrimp, and then it's also probably showing up in our drinking water. Now, if it's a groundwater source, it's probably not going to be quite so bad. Okay. To get information about your public water, is there any chance that we can click on those links? Will those hyperlinks work at all to show them? No? Okay, all right. What I did is I put some hyperlinks into the presentation just so I could show you that if you're drinking public water, there is a yearly public water report. Yeah. Am I okay to finish this up real quick, wrap it up, and then go into the summary? Okay. There is a yearly public water report that you can get online, and you can get it through the Department of Natural Resources. It's always a little bit behind. It's about a year behind. So for the 2016 data, it will be available in June. So this data is from 2015. And the good news is for the substances that have been monitored, for the 91.5% of Iowans, the 1,878 systems, Important to note this, okay? 93% of those serve communities of 3,000 or less. And I just got to say, in the new budget, the new federal budget, that was, the funding for that was identified to be axed out. So be aware of that. Probably don't want that to happen. And if you look at the kind of impact that would have on Iowa, it would be pretty dramatic. But 93% of the time, right? Our water treatment folks and things for the things that are monitored for are doing a pretty good job. Now, of course, then that means that there are some failures and problems the rest of the time. But that's a nice statistic when you consider that around the world, many people die of diarrheal disease or waterborne illness. One of the first statements that you'll find in this report is that we don't have anything like that here in Iowa, and that's a good thing. So I want to try to be positive too. And I don't want to just, give you this, like, it's bad news. But there's a lot we don't test for. There's a lot we don't monitor for, and we should keep that in mind. We also don't have good models to take into consideration multiple exposures. So we're not generating exposure models where there's multiple contaminant exposures associated with risk. We're looking at one at a time. This is an example of all the public water sources monitored in the state, both permanent and temporary. These are the ones that have failures for mainly coliforms here, both total and fecal coliforms, nitrate, and then other, which includes the radionuclides and things like organic chemicals like tetrachloroethylene, something like that. And then finally, the private water, you folks, as far as testing, you're really on your own. You have to get the water tested, and you have to evaluate that report that you get yourself. But you can get some help to get that tested through something called the Grants to Counties program. And you can call your local public health department, and you can ask for the test. And they've expanded the number of parameters. There's different drinkability parameters, metals, nitrates, arsenic. You can request some pesticides. I don't think they automatically test for atrazine at this point, but they do test for a number of metals, and then some radon can be tested for too, as far as radon gas in the water. Oops. And what they're doing when they're monitoring for these chemical substances is they're really looking for a total amount of the substance in the water. So if you're looking at the report for your city or your locality, and that's another thing you can do to get detailed information, instead of the overall report, you can just type in Cedar Falls Water Quality Report and the year, and it should pop up and you'll be able to see your specific city's report. And each year they have that up by June or July, because each city is going to have different things of those 80-something chemicals that they're looking for and monitoring. And when you look at it, a part per billion is smaller than a part per million, okay? And what you can do to estimate how much you're ingesting of something is look at how much they're reporting, and you can multiply that by the amount you consume. You could put it as cups or liters or ounces or whatever, how often you consume it in a day, and divide it by your weight. And with that information, you could go into any of these other websites, or you could just go online and you could type the substance and type safety data sheet, and you're going to get some information about at what levels the different health effects have been seen. Yeah, it's complicated a little bit, but it's not impossible. And if you got that information, you would at least know, hey, this is what I'm exposed to. Should I be concerned about it or not? And you could maybe go to somebody, a physician, your county health department, a professor, and ask them, should I be concerned about this? And you can ask your legislators, are you aware that I'm exposed to this? Do you think it's a concern? Should we be worried? Okay. There's other sources. The Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry has big profiles on all of the 80-something substances that are monitored under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And the International Agency for the Research on Cancer has specific profiles on the various carcinogens. Now, this is not every chemical. Again, 80-something chemicals, 700 a year introduced. Okay? So I'm trying to keep that in perspective. And again, these are single exposures each time, not multiple exposure models. Okay. So we have some good things going on in the state, including state centers. We have some things going on federally. TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act, was renewed last year in a bipartisan effort that was positive. But we have some funding challenges. We've been told that perhaps the Leopold Center will be itemed out as far as funding. This is an important center that provides research. It provides conferences so scientists can come together and talk about solutions to problems. It's maybe not something, that we would want to lose. Something to think about there. We also need the money so that the precautionary principle approaches to TSCA that were recommended in its renewal. And this was done with Barbara Boxer and the senator from Oklahoma. How do you say Inhofe? Okay. Inhofe, okay. They worked together, and that was introduced last year. I think it was like in May, and finally signed by President Obama. It was like one of the last things, before the election. So, but it was bipartisan effort there. Okay. We have to really think about this idea that regulations are anti-business, because I don't think that every single regulation is anti-business. Laws were created to protect the weak from the strong. There's no other reason to have a law, right? You protect the weak from the strong with a law. I don't know why you would see protecting people as anti-business. And in fact, some of the most important work and thought in the area that has looked at business viability, the ability of businesses to resist economic shocks, et cetera, some of the most fascinating, has found that green business and green technology enterprises actually go hand in hand with a clean environment. So that this idea that business and the environment don't work together, is a very sort of outdated concept if you look at some of the leading new industries, like green power, solar, other new industries like additive manufacturing, where you're using 3D printing to do some very amazing things, both in the medical field and then just in the primary manufacturing area. Those things prevent waste, provide jobs, provide us a path to the future. There is no battle between that industry and environmental good. And the more environmental good those industries do, the less pollutants are in our environment, the more we're preventing cancers. But we have to educate ourselves about these things, because if we're thinking back in a model like that kind of held sway in the 1980s and 1990s, by 1995, many people in academia were already moving beyond this, it's jobs or the environment model. But I don't think a lot of people have caught up with us yet, and I'm wondering why sometimes. Okay, so example here real quick is this glyphosate issue. And glyphosate is stuff that controls pests, herbs, like weeds on your lawn. And recently we had a signing ceremony. Everybody was happy. Well, we've put an end to any glyphosate regulation under FIFRA. There was a scientific advisory panel, and the panel did come back with the recommendation that glyphosate not be controlled at this point. But there was a lot of disagreement on the panel. I actually got a copy of the entire panel's report. It was released in March. It's about 178 pages, but I took a look at it. And I got this slide off of the Weed Science site at the University of Wyoming. Professors Miller and Chris put it up there, taking a look, because they have to work with glyphosate all the time. And they were taking a look at all the epidemiological studies. There's only about 24 of them. And one of the problems is a lot of them are correlational studies, so they don't look at individual exposures like we like to see in epidemiology. Some are case control, and there's only one prospective cohort study. But there is absolutely no industry studies or studies of individuals who mix the glyphosate. So you can see here that all the dots that go towards this side show an increased cancer risk. And you can see that the big issue is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. People were very concerned about that, and so were they, because they had to use it all the time. And they said, you know, we would really feel better if there were some studies of individuals who actually work with these chemicals before this is just signed off on as like, you know, game done, you know, kind of thing. So sometimes when we see these things on TV, we think everything is cool, it's all done, it's all taken care of. But when you dig into the issues, when you start looking at the meat of the issue, there's just more complicated factors. And I know this, you know, from my perspective too, because I learned a lot digging into that. I know that this is an important chemical to farmers who do no-till. Okay, and the no-till agriculture helps keep pollutants out of the watershed because they're not tearing up the soil. So if they can use the glyphosate, it's better. But you know, it made me think, why does it have to be an all or nothing thing? I think Dr. Enshan pointed out, you don't have to put this on your yard. And we don't have to make it so readily available to all the people who don't know. Probably this room is full of people who really do get these issues a little bit better than others because they're concerned, they're already here. You've dealt with serious health issues or helping people who have dealt with them. And so, you know, but the average person isn't going to dig in the same way. How can we tell people? How can we let them know so that they can learn about these things? Okay. This is a book that I was talking about, that there's not really a divide between economic development and environmental net good. This is a great book. And again, okay, I'm ending right now. I just want to thank one of my grad students for pointing this book out to me. I was thinking, Julie Grunkley, thank you. It was a great book. And I really recommend you get it and take a look at it. It'll give you a lot of things to think about, a lot of positive things and trends. Okay, and I'm told that I've got to stop now, and I guess I'm going to say the same things. This is my last slide that others said, and that is learn more, promote a systems thinking approach. So dig deeply into issues. Don't just, you know, take what you see in TV and things like that as the end of the story. There's usually more. Okay, ask questions of leadership and ask them how they would take a systems approach to solve a problem. Be involved with your community. Support common sense preventive regulations. They protect you. Sometimes it's worth spending some money. When we prevent cancer cases, that's money well spent, right? We prevent a lot of suffering and we save a lot of money. Be involved with your local Board of Health, okay? I'm going to tell you, like, the Board of Health here in Blackhawk County, I'm a member of the Board of Health, and I think Bonnie Sadler is still in here, right? Bonnie's somewhere. Bonnie Sadler over here is a Board of Health member. You could talk to her too and ask her about it, but be involved with your Board of Health. Come to the meetings, tell them, tell the health department, hey, we want to make sure that what is being done in our communities is something that's holistic and integrative and that we're living in a healthy, clean community. What are you doing about that? What kind of programs can we have that way? And then finally, elect individuals that reflect these values and importantly, eat right, right? You have a biotransformation system in your body. It's largely focused on your liver, but there's a phase 1 and phase 2 to it. It removes these compounds by getting them associated with what? Our buddy that we started with, water, and pulling these toxins out of your body. And the way you can ramp those systems up, and we have scientific evidence that supports this, is to provide the kinds of foods that fuel those systems. And that's definitely onions, broccoli, red cabbage, carrots, garlic could be up there too, but those kinds of foods for sure. And the more organic you eat, the less pesticides you're getting too. So you're trying to give that system a rest and ramp it up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Don't go very far away because were you summarizing? We're going to summarize next, so don't de-microphone at this moment. All right, so we've heard from our 3 speakers. We would like Dr. Zeman to now kind of bring all of the information together, and so we're going to have her come back up to the podium and we're going to summarize it, and then we're going to move from that point. We're going to move into the question and answers. And I know I've seen lots of you writing questions down, and we've collected them. If you have time now to write some down as Dr. Zeman comes back up here for a moment. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I've been taking some notes as I was asked to kind of follow the model. Okay, follow this model here. around through our thought process. And so as the different speakers were talking, I kind of took some notes on what I thought were some very salient points that they had all made. So I'm just going to go back through that. And when Ms. Gail Orcutt spoke, you know, she talked about knowledge. So the awareness, she explained ecosystem and human health issues with radon. This is just part of the natural environment, but it's widely distributed. During our last glaciation, as she explained, you know, the glacier came down, the sort of fingers of that glacier froze out and expanded, and it carried with it all kinds of rocks that have a lot of natural uranium that decays into radium, that decays into radon in it, and it's all around your home, and that radioactive decay is constantly going on. And as that radon goes, or that radium goes through the radioactive decay, it gives off a decay daughter, radon. And you have to deal with that. You need to take action along this. Your action is get your home tested, you know, and then remediate that home. $2,000 to $5,000. $5,000 would be maybe the worst. Most often it's around $1,200. You know, $5,000 might be the worst. And unfortunately, the lower your level, the more costly it becomes. And but at the end, it's the older the home and everything like that. So that's a lot cheaper though than you know, a cancer bill. So. Definitely be aware. One other thing I would also add there, remember that smoking and exposure to asbestos or silicon will multiply your risk greatly. So if you smoke and you're exposed to radon, it's something like 16 to 21 times the risk of lung cancer. If you have asbestos exposure or silica exposure also, it's something like 40-something times the risk. So some other multiple exposures end up creating these multiplying effects. Again, we don't always have good exposure models for multiple exposures. And we know that some of those things are happening with a variety of chemical exposures in water too. Okay. So again, then another final important point that I thought Gail brought up as you look around here, thinking about both the information she provided and awareness, was that experts disagree about safe levels. Is it 2, 2.7, 4? When you have a regulatory agency putting out a number, sometimes that number gets sort of set in stone and no one wants to change it. If you see a lot of doctors saying, hey, I'm seeing a lot of clients, a third of the clients, it's only like 2 or 2.7, then you should maybe listen and pay attention to that. And actually, we should change the regulatory level. But again, we have this idea that regulations are always bad, that they're always going to destroy the economy. Actually, they protect people. Some of them protect people. Some of them can be bad. But we need to be able to discern, right? The good from the bad. And embrace the good. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and then move on to Dr. Inshayan. He had a lot of great points that go right along with the idea of protecting your watershed and protecting your health. And preventing ambient exposures. You know, you have pets, you have children. What about your neighbors? Being aware and being a good neighbor is maybe you don't want to spray all that stuff all over your yard and affect the neighbor pets and the neighbor children. I mean, a child that's exposed is going to have many more years of life where a genetic mutation, an adduct, or a change in DNA, just the fact, you know, once some of the codons in our gene sequences are exposed to certain chemical substances, we can track that biochemically by something we call looking for various adduct sequences. The more adduct sequences you have, and the longer you have them, the greater the risk of errors in replication. And so little children that are exposed are going to have a much higher risk over the course of a lifetime than somebody in their 40s, 50s, or 60s. You got to think about the kids. You got to think about the children. What kind of world are you leaving them? What kind of life are you going to give them? Because they're going to have to deal with those adducts, and you know, hopefully some of them can be cleared, but some do not clear. You know. And that is a problem. Benzene is a bad one, but some of the pesticides also. So, you know, questioning the need for personal use versus agricultural. Do some of our regulations always have to reflect a you know, either or approach? You know, is there some way people of goodwill can get together and find some kind of balance? You know, that's what happened with DDT. DDT is no longer used as a pesticide in the United States unless there's a public health threat. But people used to regularly apply it in agricultural applications. And finally, they got people to change that, because when you apply DDT as an agricultural pesticide, you use something like 100 times the amount you would use in a public health application. So that's why if there is a public health emergency, people could still get DDT and apply it. If there were a serious outbreak of, you know, a mutated form of hemorrhagic fever, okay? And we were facing that versus using, okay? But there's a huge difference, right? In doing that and applying that as a pesticide in general on farm crops. So we tend to think of things as either or. And sometimes maybe we need to think about how we can come together and work together and discuss things reasonably across differences and make changes that would get us to better places. Because in a lot of the things we're talking about, multiple exposure scenarios, how much individual genetics, hormonal changes people might be going through, radon stresses, sunlight exposure, pesticides in drinking water and in their food if they're not buying organic. Because about a third of your produce will have some pesticide residues, scientific fact, seen the studies, if you're not eating organic. How much of that layers up over time and trips a person over? And then maybe it's huge life stress too. Those things function together. Everything we can do, every action we can take, personal or collective, okay, could maybe make a difference. We don't know entirely how to assign those percentages of impact from all of those different sides, but we know all those different sides are playing a role in the development of a cancer, depending on the kind of cancer and depending on the individual. So it's important to think about these things, and I think Dr. Nshan made a great use of his time making those points too. And also making the point for the cosmetic aspect of herbicide. He pointed out that purple and gold's a beautiful color. So a lot of us from UNI think that's true, but there must be a reason that UNI chose those colors, right? So maybe that just reflects the local heritage of purple and gold. Okay. So thank you. I think that's.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to invite our guest speakers up. We're going to have you shift so you can be more in the center here, and we're going to have you sit on the stools here, and we're going to have some question and answer time. I wanted to mention that some of the information, for example, the hyperlinks that were on Dr. Zeman's PowerPoint, that we will try to get that information out to you, and I'll give you some direction on how to get resources at the end of the evening, and so we'll make sure that some of these pieces you're able to access so that you can have this information. All right, so we're gonna start out here, and this is for Kamyar. Where do we get the signs that say "Be a good neighbor"?
Well, we have a kickoff event to launch the statewide campaign at 10 o'clock at Searly Park in Cedar Falls, a park that hasn't been sprayed for 15 years. And like I said, there will be a local physician speaking, a park director speaking, people from Dubuque speaking. So we're going to have a lot of lawn signs for anybody who commits to not spray their lawn. And again, even though we're not really, our campaign doesn't really deal with residential, we're hoping to inspire residential households. We're mostly trying to address schools, parks, childcare centers, places where kids are, and where the public officials, elected officials who are running our schools and parks.
Can you go to
and
darker
they have a
screen?
responsibility, so it's kind of at a larger scale, at a community scale that we're trying to address.
What day was that?
This Saturday at 10, it goes from 10 to 11 or so. So it's an event. We'll have coffee. We'll have going to be a lot of fun.
Great, okay. This Saturday,
This Saturday at Searly Park.
Searly Park.
At 10 a.m.
10 a.m. Searly Park this Saturday, which is the 22nd. All right. Dr. Zeman, what proof do we have that chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides inevitably get into our food and water?
Well, there's tons of evidence about the transfer of chemical substances through the water, through the hydrologic cycle. Many studies illustrating, depending on the soil type, the farming type, the field cover, there will be more or less, depending also on the rain conditions, the climate. There's a lot of clear evidence that these chemicals do distribute, and they distribute largely around even to the Arctic, as I pointed out with the example of the belugas. Another example, another important point that I didn't get to in my talk, but I would like to mention very quickly right now, is that maybe about 5 years ago, a number of the environmental advocacy groups funded some studies of cord blood, and they were particularly looking at cord blood with minority infants and things, and they found over 200 different kinds of chemicals in the cord blood of infants. So we know that there's a lot of exposure that does go on. Now, there's also been studies, and I've seen these myself, personally looked at them because I've been interested in if there was any really different, like nutritional difference between organic, non-organic. And then that got me into looking at studies that looked at whether there was pesticide residues, organic, non-organic, and then what the percentage of that was. And the last study that I saw looked at, and all kinds of organic and non-organic fruits and vegetables, and then of course there are different levels of toxins in the different ones. And there are different lists of vegetables that you can worry about buying that might have pesticides that matter if it's organic or not. For example, apples are one that have a high level of pesticide residue. So, if you can afford to buy organic apples, that's better. Whereas asparagus, not such a big deal. But about a third of all the produce. So even if it's non-organic, when you go in, you don't know what that third is, but about a third of it will have detectable pesticide residues. Now, that's not to say that you don't have these biotransformation systems in your body functioning, thank goodness, to help reduce your toxin load. And you do. Phase 1 and Phase 2 biotransformation systems, they're largely located in your liver, but there's many cells around the entire body where these biotransformation enzymes are produced. However, we don't have good models for multiple exposures and or ability to plug that into genetic diversity in our population to know when your system is going to be taxed to the max. And I know some things that will keep that system functioning well. Good food, exercise, rest, all of those things help optimize that system, interestingly enough. Mixed function oxidase, exercise. People who exercise more have a higher oxygen level in their peripheral blood. There's all kinds of things. And of course, stress affects that system. So there's very good evidence of some of these movement in the environment, and then certainly presence in different foods. But how to pick out when you go into an individual supermarket, well, which third is going to have some residue? I don't know how to tell you that right now. To avoid it completely by organic, but that's costly. So there are issues with that. Definitely, I would fill up whether organic or not on some of those biotransformation optimizers that I showed up there. Red cabbage, onions, broccoli, garlic, carrots. Those are great foods.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Gail. We have someone in the audience that lives in an apartment. I'm sure there are many. 3-story apartment. What are your recommendations for apartment dwellers in radon testing?
What do you think, Lonnie? If you're on the 3rd floor, you're probably fine. But you could test just to be sure, but and ask your landlord if the building's already been tested.
Okay, yeah, good. All right, let's go back.
Can I ask a quick?
Yeah, of course you may.
So, when you test, at which floor should you test?
Oh, normally you test in the lowest level. So you would test in the basement if you have a basement. If you've added on your home and there's also a crawl space, then you test in the room above the crawl space.
Okay, very good. All right. Kamiar, what about mosquito spray?
What about mosquito spray?
What about mosquito spray? It just says, what about mosquito spray? I assume it's, should we use it?
Okay, well, actually, that's a study that Dr. Zinman's student has done. But what I've looked around is that there are quite a few communities that fog, just fog on a regular basis, which there is, from what I understand, there's no public health reason for it. It's just for convenience. A lot of communities just do it for convenience. And that's not, I don't think that's recommended by public health officials. Maybe fogging might be, again, in an emergency situation, but we're talking neurotoxins. These are neurotoxins. Don't mess with insecticides. You know, it's not a trivial thing. I think the state, Iowa Department of Public Health doesn't recommend anybody to go fog just for fun. But that's what happens in a lot of small towns. Somebody calls the park department and the guy says, okay, well, we'll come and fog it. You know, what? You know, that's not, you know, there are pregnant women, there are elderly, there are all kinds of people with all kinds of health issues. You can't just go fog out there. Just wear long sleeves. It's inconvenient. Sometimes during the year it's inconvenient. It's just, there's nothing wrong with mosquitoes. And I would, for example, Black Hawk County Health Department, they do have a protocol. There are other strategies of taking care of mosquitoes with, you know, there are natural, proactive ways where you, Catherine knows a lot more about it, but fogging only deals with adult mosquitoes. It doesn't do anything else. Just those adult mosquitoes that got sprayed, they just fall and die, but all the other mosquitoes keep coming back. It just totally is like throw your money away by fogging. So that's what I understand, and I've tried to explore that with Iowa Department of Public Health. We do need, when we start this, we're starting with the lawn, but we're not stopping there. You know, in general, pesticides, everybody's just the culture of, everybody's comfortable with this very hazardous material. That mostly through marketing has been, you know, everybody's comfortable. Fogging is one that it really, communities shouldn't be exposed to it for the most part. There's no logic to it. So.
Okay, great. Catherine, what is your opinion of bottled water?
Well, yeah, the issue and concern with bottled water, I think to me one of the most concerning issues, and people aren't recycling the plastic and like just the plastic waste getting out there and the energy it takes. I actually get bottled water in bulk where the bottles are reused. Okay? The reason that I get the bottled water in bulk is, like you said, you need to take a look at your water quality reports, and if you look at it and you see something that you're concerned about, or you have a medical condition, like for example, people with arthritis, I've done research in immunotoxicology, and I have found and this is an interesting thing that's been coming up, this gives me an opportunity to kind of talk about this a little bit. There's going to be a conference in September in Des Moines that's been put together by our university, University of Iowa, the Cheese Center here in the state of Iowa, Center for the Health Effects of Environmental Contaminants, and people with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources and the Iowa Department of Public Health have been working to put this conference together, because there's been a lot of good new research looking at nitrate, for example, and the maximum contaminant level on that of 10 parts per million nitrate nitrogen. And when we do our research work, we begin to see these various health effects at 5, including some long-term studies that have been done here in Iowa by the University of Iowa and around the country by others. I've also done some work in immunotoxicology where we see the same effect at 5 parts per million, perturbations in the immune system, and some clear associations with cancers in women, particularly perimenopausal and menopausal women, cancers being thyroid, ovarian, and kidney cancer. And we're talking about some fairly higher risks, at least doubled at times. And there's going to be a handout at the conference highlighting these studies, and this is at half of the regulatory level. I mean, this is not a popular idea right now related to the cost of dealing with that. In order to remove the nitrates, it's not an easy thing. You have to use reverse osmosis filtration to remove it. Thus, this was the basis of the big lawsuit in Des Moines that was recently set aside. Des Moines is spending millions of dollars to keep the level of nitrate nitrogen below 10. And when you get close to that level of 10, you do see a lot more inflammation, and then you see these risks in these studies that appear to be very clear to a lot of people looking at it. And this has been something that's been discussed for at least 3-4 years now, at least, including a time that Woods Hole National, the Woods Hole Institute and the National Cancer Institute and the National Institutes of Health put together a conference in Washington. And I went to that, and some of the major researchers around the country with the National Cancer Institute were talking about it then.
Okay.
So it's been around for a while, but it's something to keep in mind.
Okay.
So,
Good, thank you. There is another question here. We're running out of time, and we want to make sure we can get to some more of what we have on our agenda here. But there was a question about reverse osmosis, so maybe they can find you after we're done. One last question here for Gail before we wrap up. What should we ask our legislators to do about radon, or what should we ask them to do on our behalf where radon is concerned?
Ask them to require schools to test and mitigate if necessary. Ask them to offer you a rebate if you have to, or a tax credit if you have to mitigate your home. Ask them to require a test with every residential real estate transfer. Some people think that's required, it's not. Maybe, this is a high hope of mine, ask them to require new homes that are built to include an active radon system. With 70% of the homes that need radon mitigation, if we keep building homes that don't require it, we just keep getting farther and farther behind. So those would be my asks.
Great, yeah, Catherine, yeah, yep.
can I add something
Yeah.
to what Gail said, which is right? Because I have met a gentleman who is an architect who has been designing homes and trying to get that into legislation that use solar systems that are built into the homes, and he uses foundation construction methods that include this solar built-in radon mitigation system. It's pretty neat, but okay, I
Yeah,
need
yeah.
that information.
Yeah, great. Okay, wonderful. We are unfortunately out of time. There are more questions, definitely, and I apologize. But thank you very much to our wonderful speakers, and thank you for your questions. We're going to shift focus now so that we can start working on your personal action plan. I think we have a great start to these action plans, but now we want to make sure you have some time to really think about this before you go away this evening. So Lori Sewell is going to come up next, and she is going to lead us through that portion of the evening. Lori is a 6-year breast cancer survivor who actively volunteers for the National Beyond Pink team. Thank you. Yes, we're good. Thank you. Yes, thank you. We didn't have the whole traffic pattern worked out, but yes, thank you very much to our speakers. They hopefully will be able to stay around a little bit afterwards to answer those questions for you. But Lori will come up and lead us through this. Lori has been very involved in the National Breast Cancer Coalition's Board of Directors. She serves as the Education Council Chair here and the Advocacy Council Co-Chair for the Beyond Pink team. She's a graduate of Project LEAD, NBCC's science training program for advocates, and regularly lobbies Iowa congressmen advocating for breast cancer issues. She co-founded the Iowa Breast Cancer Deadline 2020 Action Network, and I invite you all, if you're a Facebooker, to check that out. Lori has a BA in elementary education, an MA in educational technology, and a second MA in educational administration. She works at the University of Northern Iowa as an instructional designer, technologist, supporting faculty technology use in teaching and learning, and teaching faculty professional development workshops. So take it away, Lori.
Thank you, and we're so glad you are joining us tonight to learn more about this. So first of all, I just want to draw one last attention to the model and remind you that you've heard, thank you, remind you that you have heard a little bit about the impact of our ecosystem on our health. And we've tried to make you more aware of that. And so this portion of the program tonight is really focusing on the final third of that model, the action. And we want to kind of assist you in getting started in taking some sort of action. Okay. We do need more hands for this job, don't we? So in your booklets, if you would turn to this page that has the action plan, I'll explain what that action plan is all about, and then I'm going to walk you step by step through a process of working sometimes individually and sometimes with your table group or in even smaller groups, pairs, to walk through the graphic and fill that out. So at the very bottom of the graphic, we have the current reality, and that graphic is a globe with the color of cancer ribbons around it. So that represents the current reality of our world, which is a world full of various kinds of cancer. And then at the top of the graphic, you see the other globe, which is the model that represents what we're trying to achieve, the desired state. And that desired state would be a world free of cancer. And so what we see in between are the goals that we're going to ask you to think about how you can help make a difference to achieve that desired state. So each box is going to represent a goal. You'll be picking 3 goals, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then the lines that go up to the box are where you would write some action steps that would help you achieve that goal. And again, we'll break that down and take it step by step. On the page following that in your booklets, you will see some levels of action. And you've heard our speakers make some recommendations about actions you can take. Actions might be something that affects your personal level. It could be something that might impact your family, where you're taking it to that next step and involving your family. It could be something at the community level. I know that Camio's got an event coming up for the community involved with the Be Good to Your Neighbors. Be a Good Neighbor. Be a Good Neighbor. So those are examples of the community level types of actions that you might take. And then of course there's the national level. That is something that Christine Carpenter and Kristen and a number of others in the room and I are involved in with the National Breast Cancer Coalition, where we're regularly talking with our legislators. And you don't have to go to DC. We do at least once a year, some of us more than that, and meet with them personally. But you can do that right from your own home through social media, through just making calls, emailing your legislators, and getting involved in that Iowa Breast Cancer Deadline 2020 is one way to start with that. So look at those examples, those more specific examples, if you want some ideas on how to get started with some of those goals. Hopefully, you already wrote down some goals that you might be interested in pursuing, but what we're going to ask you to do is try to think about one personal action you might take for one of your goals. You don't have to follow this guideline, but it's a suggestion. Maybe think of another one that might impact your community, and maybe the third one then might be something that you're doing to try to affect future generations, to make it a better place for the future. Oh, got a little ahead, didn't I? Didn't realize that. Let me back up. Okay, I think, yeah, that's where we are. All right, so what we're gonna do next is, in your table groups, I want you to spend about 2 minutes deciding who's gonna be a timekeeper. So when you're working in a larger group, somebody will kind of watch that time and keep you moving. And then somebody else should be the facilitator. The facilitator would be someone who's just going to try to invite everybody to join in on the conversation. If somebody hasn't had an opportunity and somebody else is talking a little bit more, maybe draw that other person into the conversation more by asking what they think. And then for a facilitator, or I'm sorry, for the recorder, when we do, we're going to be doing some things with the large poster paper and the markers that are at your table. That would be the person who would record your ideas that you're talking about. Any questions about that for the next 2 minutes? That means you gotta move pretty quick. Go.
I loved the conversation tonight. Everything they talked about was completely applicable to things going on within the state and all of us that live here.
They spoke about things that are doable and I can relate to them here in Iowa. I liked the practical steps that they talked about that we can actually remember and do in our daily basis and educate others, families, friends about it. So it was very practical what they talked about.
Well, I thought the three speakers complemented each other very well. There was a range of both issues and also approaches to those issues, and so I did learn a lot from this, and I didn't know that I would. I thought that I knew a lot about cancer.
I would have loved to hear a whole lot more on each topic, and it's something that I think the cancer patients know better than physicians know or the medical community, and it needs to get widespread, I think, that knowledge about what we're doing to the environment. Like if I start talking about toxins and things like that, they look at me like, where am I going to get that? Where are you not going to get that, really? We don't do a very good job, though, as a whole. I mean, it's not like I talk to everybody, but you know, pregnant women need to know. I don't think it comes from us in the medical community very much at all, and it needs to.
It was excellent, and it's a super important thing that you've done. I made some notes that, to me, education about these topics education is super important. So we can't really take informed personal action. We can't advocate for responsible policies unless we're well educated about these things. So I wanted to jump back. I came to the Ignite the Cancer Conversation event last year, and you noted right in the beginning that last year was about the science of cancer, and I think based on feedback you had from participants last year, I would have been one of those that said we need to talk about environmental causes of cancer and our exposure and ways that we can prevent, cancer and do a better job of keeping it, out of our ecosystem.
I had no idea that Iowa had such a high incidence of radon beyond the acceptable level, and 7 out of 10 homes have higher than acceptable levels of radon. So, and I also didn't know you had to test every 2 years. So I am going to go back and test. We tested, I think, 10 years ago and decided that we were A-okay, but maybe not.
Well, I didn't know that it was the second leading cause of lung cancer. So that was pretty eye-opening, and I learned about the danger level, which is like, I think they said something between 2 and 4, but I'm going to just stick with 2 and not risk it. Testing radon is actually pretty easy. One of the goals, which is more to a personal level, is to test the radon level where my kids live, actually, because our kids don't live with us anymore, and we test our house, but we kind of forgot to test where they live.
I was surprised to learn that 7 out of 10 homes test positive for radon. I was also surprised to learn that the different regulating bodies don't necessarily agree on what number is safe and what number is not.
I said radon testing is cancer prevention. The leading cause among non-smokers of lung cancer is radon. 400 Iowans per year die of radon-induced cancer, which is the same as highway deaths. The level of radon that's considered acceptable by the EPA is the same as smoking 8 cigarettes a day. 7 out of 10 homes in Iowa are at an unacceptable level. It's the highest state in the country. And so we need to be testing every 2 years, which for me personally, I'm not doing. So I bought my house 11 years ago and tested it then. So one of my personal actions is going to be to go home and test. So even though I feel like I'm pretty aware of some of these things, these issues, I'm falling short. We need to change our chemical regulatory system. That's the take-home message in my mind, is that we have to do something about that. Numbers that are kind of on the scale that make your eyes glaze over, most people don't even really know how to comprehend, but 50 million pounds of ag chemicals every year are dumped on the ground in Iowa. The ecosystem can't handle that, can't absorb it, and as Dr. Zeman later noted, water attracts all of those chemicals, and they wind up in our hydrologic system and in our bodies. And there's really no way to stop that process from occurring other than to not use chemicals. And we don't have to. We can have a very productive and healthy ag system that will feed all of us without an intensive chemical regime like what our modern industrial agriculture system is reliant on. So I guess, those are big things. We need new policies. And back to the education, we can't advocate for those without more people being aware. So thank you again.
The other thing that he brought up was the cosmetic use of herbicides and pesticides, which I thought was interesting. because we probably do use a lot of that we don't need to.
Pesticides is a tough one because even when you don't want to do it, there are a lot of other people that want to use it, and in a neighborhood that a lot of people use pesticides and you're the only one that has the weeds, that's a kind of a tough one to change the mindset of a large population in your town. The goal is to educate people about it.
I think I would have loved to hear him go on and on and on. But I think his idea with the neighborhood thing is a great one, and we need to get more people interested in not spraying and feeling like it's okay to let the lawn go. But we got to do it, and I think neighbors can influence neighbors. I don't know how we're going to influence everybody, but you got to start somewhere.
Another goal is to convince ourselves, me and my husband, to eliminate pesticides from our lawn, and talk to the neighbors and talk to the friends and families to see if they can do the same thing. Education is the key.
I was pretty well aware of the issue of pesticides. I think some time ago there was the campaign that was Lawns for Kids and Lawns for Pets, and but I think the moving to the schools and community parks, that's the strategy is new. So my awareness of pesticides remained about the same, but the strategy of really focusing on spaces that children use, I think, is a really good idea.
I hope that in the future the mindset is actually shifted, so somebody that has a perfect lawn with no dandelions looks as the bad neighbor that uses the chemicals. Drinkable water is not something in abundance. Only 0.08% of all the water on Earth is drinkable. So we have to be really careful what we do or what we put in our drinking water.
And then I think some take-home messages that I took from her talk were our energy and ag policies, back to policy, energy and ag policies and practices introduce pollutants into our hydrologic cycle. And so without some reform in those areas, this is not something that's going to change. Cancer will continue.
Well, I knew that agricultural runoff was a big issue for Iowa's drinking water. I think the chart showing the Mississippi River Valley and how the pesticides kind of collect in these river valleys, that was very telling and very graphic. And so I think that might be publicized more, because people living in river valleys certainly need to be aware of their heightened risk.
I learned that water has incredible bonding capability, and so when we put these chemicals in the ground, they do affect our water. If the businesses care about people's health, then they would follow suit and they respect the regulations.
I mean, maybe our cutoffs for what we allow in the water is not right. It needs to be looked at again.
Right.
Oh, it's a big problem, I think.
Yeah.
Everybody who gets cancer somehow goes down that road of cleaning up their environment. They all do it.
You know, we have the Clean Water Act, we have the Safe Drinking Water Act. Those were put in place in the early 70s and did a lot, and they're under threat right now of being dismantled. So public education to strengthen, not reduce our regulatory system to protect our water is of the utmost importance to public health, and we have to do that. Goals, Yeah, so I guess I liked how you talked about the continuum from personal to community and then to future generations, like those different levels of goals, I guess. So I framed it that way. So my personal goal is to go home and test my home for radon. I bought a test kit.
My third goal was to improve our diet and buy more local food and buy more organic food. So it would, long term, it would impact our health.
Well, I'm going to allow more diversity in my lawn for sure. So I want to get a sign, and I'm going to find out if the hospital sprays and see what we can do about that.
So I work in a GI office as a nurse practitioner, and some of the information that was brought up this evening, such as testing your water regularly or radon testing on a regular basis, or eliminating some of the foods that might have residual pesticides or residual chemicals, even through the processing of the food, are all things that could be implemented into practice as far as educating patients.
Another thing that I didn't mention when I talked about Dr. Nshian's talk is we need to continue to talk about it being okay. This sounds almost silly in a way, but we need a cultural paradigm shift that begins to think that it's okay to have a weedy lawn, and I'm putting weedy in quotes, a diverse lawn. And that's the beginning, I believe. If we can begin to see things differently, and imagine that it's not dirty or less good or anything like that. Yeah, lazy. If we can begin to think differently about those things and view them differently, and in fact kind of flip it on its head so that it's viewed as a healthy and good thing to have a diverse lawn, then maybe that opens up other thinking in terms of agriculture and energy policy and other things as well, So we've got to continue to talk and shift our cultural awareness.
I think individually, so our group had all decided that we really wanted to focus on reducing radon and pesticide use in our local community. But for me personally, I thought that, contacting my children's principals and perhaps even the school board or the PALS, the PTA essentially organization at the elementary school, that might be the way to approach that issue.
So just personal goals at home. Certainly we live in the country, so to test our rural water, because that hasn't been done since the kids were babies. And then the radon testing, we've done that in the past, but I didn't realize it needed to be every 2 years, so that as well. And then just the whole idea of eating cleaner, whether it's organic food or it's less preservatives and less processed foods, that kind of thing.
Future generations, to me, is all linked to policy. So I feel like I personally and others need to advocate for stronger policy at all levels of government, local, state, and federal policies to strengthen regulations related to public health, and that has to do with chemicals, with water protection, with energy policy, lots and lots of things. Again, at all levels, even down to local building codes that require radon mitigation in every home that's built. There's no reason to not do it when 70% of all homes in the state have a radon problem. As citizens, be more actively engaged more broadly. So this is an issue for our democracy, I believe.